Keep forgetting to connect to Discord voice. Let's try that. So this is supposed to be for voice and screen. I think this is where I'm supposed to go. Don't care about that, just need the audio. And it should be bouncing up and down, but it's not. So I'm doing something wrong. Am I connected? It says voice connected. Do I not have the right room? Oh, that's right. I wonder if you can make presets. Oh well. Maybe I don't have Discord voice this time, but I wish. Unless, let's see. 27 and 28. No, they're there. It should be going. Bummer. Yeah, I don't know. It might be going in there, but actually, how do I see that? Wasn't there a voice and screen share video? Check. It shows me on there, but I'll deal with that later. All right, welcome to evidence-based audio engineering and hopefully education. And this is episode number 152, and I'm calling it Fraud of the Gaps. Okay, so basically we went through this post a long time ago. It's just kind of in passing, but let me reread it. It's from Safe Space. It says, Do tubes in mics actually color the sound at all? Take a look at the attached pictures which show the signal curve of a tube and a transistor. They look awfully lot the same. Let me pop this up on the screen here. How do I do that? Sorry. Thought I had the right monitor on. There we go. Okay. So, they look awfully a lot the same. Unless you start driving the tube, transistor, or op amp into distortion levels, there should probably be zero difference in the sound. None of the microphones I know of drive the signal to such high volumes. That's what guitar distortion pedals are for. In other words, I take a tube mic. I screw it in one place so it won't move at all. I play a digitally reproducible test signal into it and record it. Then I take out the tube and replace it with the transistor, op amp, whatever electronics, which does the same thing as the tube electronics did. I record the exact same test signal again. I compare the results. What do I hear? Will there be any kind of perceivable difference in there at all? Judging by the graphs, there shouldn't be unless I drive the signal through a tube distortion box. And then there's some pictures here. Let me pop it up. So here's the plate current and plate voltage. I don't know what he's measuring here actually. It's not a frequency. It's just showing that it's linear. Here's yeah, I guess it's showing them both that they're linear in their linear range. You know, he's asking the questions we want you to ask, right? He's saying, you know, if you're saying that there's this effect, especially you're saying that there's this effect that I should pay piles and piles of money more for, you got to show that that effect exists. And, you know, I don't think people do. And that's what we spend a lot of this show talking about anyway, right? Just keep an eye on the chat here. So of course, you know, the faithful, the true believers and everybody, they're gonna freak out like, oh man, it's totally different. You're crazy, blah, blah, blah. Like, here we go. Oh my God, you mean after 70 plus years of folks recording with tube mics and 50 plus years of solid state mics, coexisting alongside of them, you, the chosen one, have finally figured out that they don't do anything differently than solid state mics. You know, snarky, right? But the guy says, I'm not the original poster says, I'm not a chosen one. I just believed that the warmth of the tube mics myth until I started questioning, thinking logically if the tubes actually have a sound to them or not. This led me to check their measurable signal curves, and this only raised more questions. Hence, I am here now trying to verify my observations based on the data I found. In other words, these forums are filled with misinformation about the year we use. Allegedly, this guy's new, but, you know, he don't sound like it. He sounds like a smart guy. These are the questions we're supposed to be asking, right? All the time. This is the same thing when you're dealing with these health frauds. You know, they're trying to sell you magic vampire juice. You know, I hate these people. But in audio, it's just guys that are either they spent a lot of money on something, so they have to believe it, or, you know, I don't want to psychologize them, but they're nuts. It's a nice way of putting it. So, you know, one of the bone stock answers to this. So apologetics, because apologetics isn't just in this one field. It's in audio engineering. Common apologetics argument, and it's used right here. It's, have you ever recorded music in a studio with a tube mic, or do you just look at the charts? As if the charts, you know, charts can lie, but every time you measure them, they do the same thing. You know, Ethan Weiner likes to say, I'm going to paraphrase him broadly, so don't take this out on him. But there's only certain parameters that you really need to measure to know what something's going to sound like. You know, distortion, noise, bandwidth, and frequency response, right? I mean, if we know those things, yes, there's some other parameters. You know, how is it going to respond? You know, we're checking linear versus nonlinear or whatever. But in general, that's really it. And, you know, these guys always try and hide this magic something somewhere. And it's the God of the gaps. It's the same God of the gaps. Like, you know, when you say, I want to see a transitional form for this, crocodile or something, you know, like, oh, here you go. This is you know, somewhat in between the, this species and this species. And see, when you fill that gap, then they say, oh, well, now there's two gaps. There's another gap before that new one and another gap after that one. And this is just the goalposts flying down the road, and they'll keep doing this. You know, so we always say, and this is the epistemology, right? Who's got the burden of proof here? You know, if you're making this claim, you got to bring some evidence. Really, it's worthless without it. So it's like, have you ever recorded music? So it's just an argument. It's an ad hominem or whatever, right? So the original poster answers honestly, nope, haven't done proper recordings with a tube mic, and that's beside the point here. And then the guy answers, I rest my case. So no refutation, no measurements, no nothing. And that's the thing I always ask. And we did this last week. I'm sure we did that the week before. I ask for measurements on something, on a claim, and it's crickets. There's no measurements. Sometimes there's an excuse why measurements are a bad thing, which is really funny to me, but whatever. Okay, so wanted to show next. So that's just kind of the beginnings. And, you know, we let this thing go and moved on to other things, but somebody responded, and here we go. Just recently. I haven't read the whole thread, and I don't want to ridicule anyone. It just often seems the case that people who are really good at science understand the limitations of science better than people who know less about it. Science as religion and dogma, there we go again, is much more common among non-scientific people than among leading scientists. You should look at the philosophical discussion called science criticism. Start with Popper, for example. Look at the pioneers in quantum physics and see how critical they were of science, etc. I've studied these topics for many years. Sooner than later, you get into severe epistemology land. How can you prove that there is an outside world? the point is that you can only measure what you have first encountered without measurement. A measurement is a decision about what to measure. I think there's so much wrong with this, but we'll go through this. And what kind of measurement should be applied? A measurement is a limiting decision. It blanks out things. It is an approach. There is no measurement that falls from the sky given by the gods. A measurement often tells you more about the limitations of the mindset of the approach than about the fact that it tries to capture. Even that fact is the result of a choice that blanks out most of what is given. A measurement is always a translation. It's not the given fact. It's not as close to the fact as you might think and hope it is, whatever the facts might be. Make some music and be happy. Well, the end of that, fine. The very end of that. But of course, you know what I'm going to say. I answered him with, which of course, the science-minded among us would see as a God of the gaps argument. Partly, there's a bunch of stuff in there. But this whole thing about we don't know what to measure. I mean, if we do things that measure the same, they sound the same. It goes both ways. It's not just that we measure them and the measurements come out the same. It's that if we tweak something to measure like something else, it sounds the same as that something else. So we obviously know what we need to measure. I just want to go through this kind of a line at a time. I haven't read the whole thread. I don't blame you. And I don't want to ridicule anyone. Okay. It just often seems the case that people who are really good at science understand the limitations of science better than the people who know less about it. I'm sure that's true, but it's probably a deepity. What's the point of that? What limitations are you worried about? Because I don't think there's a science limitation to what we're trying to measure here. The difference between tube and solid state amplifiers inside a microphone. No way. That's science. That is squarely in the realm of science. How you feel about it, maybe it's still science. Ultimately, psychology and mind are still biology, and biology is chemistry and physics, and chemistry is physics. So it's science. It's as science as it gets. Here come the scammers and spammers. Science as religion and dogma is much more common amongst non-scientific people than among leading scientists. Show me someone who has science as a religion. I've heard the term scientism used by frauds when they don't want to back up why their fake medicine doesn't work. Why I've heard it by anti-poke people to explain why you shouldn't get the poke. But science as a religion, so what happens if you get super fundamentalist about the religion? You have to test things and verify them. Like, what are you even talking about? Dogma, fine. I mean, we have some central dogmas. I'm fine with that. I believe I exist because you get into the solipsism later on, right? Okay, you should look at the philosophical discussion called science criticism. Why? We can measure these things. We can measure these two mics and they look the same. And so if you have a phenomenon and it's hiding someplace, you better show it. Show where it is, show what it is, show someone else how to find it. If we can replicate it, now we got a phenomenon, and that's actually a cool thing. So we should do something like that. So let's figure that out. See what else. Start with Popper, for example. No. No? Look at the pioneers in quantum physics and see how critical they were of science. Were they? I don't think they were. I think they were critical of Einstein. Okay, hold on. Let's see. Pioneers in quantum physics. Sorry, I can't type for crap. Were critical of science. I don't think so. What's a pioneer? Critical. What do they mean by critical of science? I don't even think you got to back that one up. It sounds like nonsense. I I've studied these topics for many years. Okay. Sooner than later, you get into severe epistemology land. Thank you. And yours seems to be broken. I mean, that's why I've been reading this, right? How can you prove there is an outside world? Okay. Not going to get into solipsism and all that stuff. That's fine. So he goes on to say, the point is that you can only measure what you have first encountered without measurement. Okay. Or that you think you encountered without measurement, or that someone told you they encountered without measurement. I think you could measure. Okay. Again, that sounds like a deepity. A measurement is a decision about what to measure and what kind of measurement should be applied. Okay. In this case, we want to know if these things sound different. Is the frequency the same? Is the input to output level response the same? Is the distortion level about the same? And does it add too much noise that we can't tell it what it is? What is all this? Are these questions even about this question? Measurements is a limiting decision. It blanks out things. It's an approach. There's no measurement that falls from the sky given by the gods. Again, why is this? A measurement often tells you more about the limitations of the mindset of the approach than about the fact that it tries to capture. Even that fact is a result of the choice that blanks out most of what is given. You know what this sounds like? Doesn't this sound like postmodernism? Right? This is like the hard solipsist, postmodernist. Sure, I mean, we can't know for sure anything. But I'm going to live my life as if some of the stuff that I think is true is true. Laws of non-contradiction, the law of identity, and all that stuff. They always say that. I have no idea. That's okay. A measurement also is a translation. A measurement also always is a translation. Okay. It's not the given fact. Okay. A picture of a car is not a car, but I can use it to identify the car. It's not as close to the facts as you might think and hope it is. Well, how much closer do you need it than as close to it is, as it is, whatever the facts might be? And then make some music and be happy. Okay, I agree with that part. That's sure. So I like one of these guys had to say, Shepke. Is this what happens when safe space debate epistemology? Where's the aspirin? And Matt says, he's answering something close to this thing. On a more this is what he's responding to. On a more practical level, you might know about studies on frequency plots. Frequency plots say almost nothing about the sound of a microphone. Wrong. Yet they are still standard in most mic descriptions. They found out over time that a waterfall plot comes closer. There is an interesting AES paper about this. False dichotomy? The usual frequency and THD plots of digital converters are pretty meaningless, but hey, it's a convincing looking graph and it looks impressive, so let's add it to our shiny brochure, etc. What's wrong with them? Say what's wrong with them. So for heaven's sakes, measure whatever you're moved to measure, but all know the limitations of that, which you can't. Well, you have to prove that, there's limitations, but you have to prove that they matter to what's audible. The threshold of perceptibility matters. If you don't know the limitations of your measurement, you can't use measured information correctly. To know the restrictions and limitations of your measurement and actually what happens when you measure, as well as you can, gets you closer to valid informational. You know what this sounds like? This sounds like presuppositional apologetics, doesn't it? You can't know anything unless you believe my religion. My religion is the foundation for epistemology. My religion is the properly basic foundation upon which you can know things. And without my religion, you can't know anything. This is what this sounds like. Interesting. So let me get back to, where was it? Sorry, I gotta jump back to that page. Okay, here we go. They were talking about, of course, the that song, The Silence, whatever, the 43 seconds or whatever. Okay. Where are we going? It is, sorry, I'm trying to find this post. I know I should have grabbed it. Trying to find, sorry. Okay. Yeah, let me just read through this. So this is Nat replying to the not the original poster, but the guy with all the scientism stuff. So he says, let's apply the same thinking to your absolute statement. So frequency plots say almost nothing about the sound of a microphone. You know, he's asking him, because that was the claim, right? What do you even mean that frequency plots tell you what frequency response is? A waterfall is better, sure. But that is nothing. That's a false dichotomy, right? How do we judge the sound when it's a subjective and psychological measurement? The usual frequency and THD plots of digital converters are pretty meaningless for what? In other words, when he says that what did he say? The usual frequency and THD plots of digital converters are pretty meaningless. No, I mean, they tell you how much distortion they make and what frequencies they'll pass and how they pass them. What do you mean they're meaningless? So, of course, he asked that. They're convincing looking graphs to convince someone of what? These are, again, choices of what to measure. Surely the whole point of the philosophy side of things is self-awareness, and to then keep it in the back of your mind whilst you get on with actually making a decision on what to measure rather than being frozen in indecision, or, much worse, allowing indecision to take hold, throw all the decision-making away and resort to subjectivity as the test. Of course, for personal purchasing decisions, subjectivity is fine. Okay, so let me go back to here. And this is, this is kind of everything when they ask, when people tell you, you have to buy this or you have to buy that. Where's your evidence? I know we harp on this all the time, or I harp on this all the time, but it's really what it's about for me. This just claims, people making claims that they can't back up. They did it about my health my whole life, and it wasn't a pleasant thing. So let's see. Here's another thing that responding to. This monkey says, I've witnessed a sort of anti-intellectual sect of safe space users who post in the name of science, who say things like, I know that everything is objective and subjectivity doesn't exist and should not be discussed because it's not relevant. The ludicrous reality is we're discussing music, one of the most subjective topics around. It's weirdly militant and small-minded in some cases, and you see prepared arguments being tossed at people who are trying to say something new. Some people have answers, and they look around to find questions to apply them to. Oh, who does that sound like? A sort of reverse logic. If you arrive at a conclusion, especially in advance, it sort of limits what you're able to see when new things arise, and new things arrive at every moment. And so Nat 8808 is responding. I'm not so sure what it is being said by these people. I think that's an understanding of it coming from an annoyance of their insistence, a characterization that dismisses their stance, understandably if it's annoying. It's just well known in neurology and in general science that the brain creates an imaginary world and our senses are only part of the info that it uses to create the imaginary representation, if they play a part at all sometimes. Not dreaming, probably. That makes subjective assessment unreliable, and if you're aware of that unreliability, what's the point of using it to judge anything? They're not saying subjectivity doesn't exist. They're saying it can be meaningless as a means. Let me say that again. They're not saying subjectivity doesn't exist. They're saying it can be meaningless as a means to judge something. Obviously, it's a generalization. I don't need to an objective measurement to judge my speakers are connected out of phase, but I would to feel more confident something was transparent when subjective testing would rely on unreliable auditory memory when doing some kind of A/B testing on my own in less than ideal conditions. Or like volume, trying to remember volume in two different conditions or in the same condition, just Actually, don't even change conditions. Just change the volume a little bit and do an ABX test just with the one thing. All you do is change volume. See what happens. Okay. When it comes to recording music being subjective, I think I disagree. Music is about creative and conceptual choices. Choosing to use your personal subjective assessment and taste is but one creative choice. Choosing to blend a few people's subjective choices is also a creative choice. Another creative choice would be to apply a concept of transparency in the recording chain, a transparency that does not rely on one person's subjective and biased translation of transparency, but instead an attempt to find a universal transparency that might be found via objective choices. To sample the sound field with a few microphones following scientific principles as if in a lab would also be a creative and conceptual choice. So I disagree that recording music is a subjective exercise. It's a creative and conceptual exercise of which choosing to apply your own subjective taste is but one option. It just so happens that it's a cultural norm to be subjective in making and recording music in every choice, it seems. Observing a cultural norm shouldn't lead to the belief that it's the way things should be or how they are. That's an existing cultural norm, a very established cultural norm, or an upcoming cultural norm, I would say. Anyway, that's it from me. I have some exercise and some donuts to get to, but I'll see you guys.